Let me introduce one of the greatest pianists. You can't say enough about what Henry has done over the years. He was born in New Orleans and has gone all over the world and has been a victim of Katrina, a recovering Katrina. Is that what we say? Anyway, please welcome Henry Butler.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to take a seat here. Henry, I guess what we can talk about, we're going to have Henry play a little bit, and we'll talk about the business of what he's doing and a little bit about New Orleans piano, I think, as well, because we have a piano tradition here, right, Henry, that you can't deny. He's one of the greatest.
Well, that's correct. We have an interesting piano tradition, very different from, say, the Kansas City piano tradition and the New York piano tradition. This piano tradition was founded on rhythm mostly, although a few of the pianists had lots of facility. James Booker had a lot of facility, and he had more of a balance going between the technical prowess and the rhythmical content. James Booker was one of those guys who, as I told one class today, merged a little classical music with blues and some jazz and gospel. And it didn't matter what he was playing. If he felt like doing that, he could do it, and he did it. Toots Washington was also a player who had a good amount of facility or a good amount of technique. If you hear the song Tina Na, that's Toots Washington playing behind, see, that's what happens when you get old.
He just celebrated his 60th birthday yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you. Thinking of the singer who did Keep a Knockin', but you can't come in. Not Little Richard, but I'll think of it in a minute. In any case, he accompanied a lot of people, Toots Washington did, in New Orleans, and some of his stuff sounds like Professor Longhair, and some of it sounds like a stride player, a wonderful stride player. If anybody has seen the video, Piano Players Rarely Play Together, you've seen him with Professor Longhair and Alan Toussaint. You might have that video in your library here. There was also some other pianists that you probably have heard. Tom McDermott, who is a very wonderful student of Jelly Roll Morton's music.
And Jelly Roll is one on the top there.
Yes.
One of the first.
Yes. Yeah, Jelly Roll Morton. And we can go further back to Gottschalk, who wrote music for practically every country in the world. And come forward to people like David Targanowski, who's a jazz and New Orleans music pianist. There are a lot of, and then we can get into, there's champion Jack Dupree, who we talked about a little bit earlier in one of the classes that we worked with today. New Orleans is home for a lot of wonderful pianists and a lot of wonderful drummers a lot of interesting trumpet players. Of course, we know about Louis Armstrong, Bunk Johnson, and some of the people that you probably haven't heard that were not recorded. Yeah, I mean,
You gotta, excuse me, but you gotta mention Dr. John probably in that mix too.
you know, that's right. That's right. Dr. John is still one of the great students of New Orleans music, and he can play anything from stride to, you know, real blues to anything that's New Orleans. Who else did I miss? Did I miss anybody else?
I think you got pretty, you wanna play a little bit of something representing New Orleans for a second?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
let's hear Henry, huh?
Okay. Oh, and Alan Toussaint. Yeah, yeah. And John Cleary. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Henry, for the people that are not from New Orleans, tell us a little bit why this is New Orleans. What makes it New Orleans over, you know, Bill Evans or Keith Jarrett?
Well, that's actually a really good question. And I think what happens in New Orleans is you have so much rhythm here. And one of the reasons why you have so much rhythm is because this was actually the last festival for the slaves and the ex-slaves to go into Congo Square and dance and sing, on weekends. This was one of the last festivals for the slaves to hang out and dance and sing to close. There were festivals in Philadelphia, there were festivals in other places, but most of those places closed a lot earlier than this festival. This festival closed, I think, in the mid-1880s, which really was about 12, 13, 14 years before jazz officially started. So you had all this rhythm going, and people playing lots of drums and percussion and that kind of thing, and dancing. And then in 1897, officially, jazz was started. So I think probably in the U.S., this is the most rhythmic city. You can hear it in Professor Longhair's playing. You can hear it in, of course, James Booker. You can hear it in Huey Piano Smith. You can hear it in practically all of the pianists of this city. Bill Evans was a wonderful player, but he's a lot more lyrical, a lot more melodic, a lot more technical than most of the players in this city. The left hand serves a very different function with Bill Evans, and Keith Jarrett is a little different animal, because he can be very rhythmic in his left hand, but it's a different kind of a rhythmic scheme. There's a lot more intellect involved, and of course, sometimes it's a lot of vamping on one change, and sometimes it can go all over the place with Keith.
Well, you were working with the Monk Institute today, and it was very interesting how he had these guys who were really doing an intellectual kind of thing, and then let's throw some New Orleans into it. And he worked with one musician after the other. Explain a little bit about what you did there, and maybe that will help too.
Yeah. Well, the underlying rhythm, as I told the students in that class, for most New Orleans music is the bambula rhythm. And the bambula rhythm sounds like this. Let me hear you clap that. Okay, now, and some people say the clave is the underlying rhythm, but that's the first one. Clave was very important as well. And when you listen at that, when you realize that that's the underlying rhythm, you can understand what the meters were doing, right? The meters said, do that for me. Okay, so good. So that's where the whole hey pacue comes from, right? And of course, we haven't had a real, we haven't had a new fad or a new style of music since the meters, at least on that level. But so the bambooler and the clave, and sometimes you can hear other Caribbean flavors coming into the music, like the rumba, mambo. As I was playing against the bamboola, right? Yeah, so that was one of the big rhythms that Professor Longhair used a lot. I mean, and he also did some boogie stuff and some lilting rhythms. And Earl King, who was a singer and guitarist, wrote a piece that was in some stations credited to Professor Longhair. Professor Longhair played piano on it, and I'm going to play a little bit of that because it has sort of a different flavor to it. You can still hear, if you know what to listen for, you can still hear that underlying rhythm, which is the bamboola rhythm. Okay, so that is one of the major differences in most of the music and most of the piano playing in this city, except when somebody like James Booker decided to become a balladeer, you know, or play some really nice, slow, lyrical stuff. Then you got the blues from anywhere he wants to take you.
Well, in your early recording career, you were with MCI and Windham Hill, Atlantic Jazz, and you were doing more of a jazz kind of thing with a jazz trio, like with Dejanette and Ron Carter.
Right.
And so when did you, that was the early recording, so it was more of a jazz thing.
Yeah, I signed with MCA in 1985. 1985. My first record with MCA was with Charlie Hayden and late Billy Higgins. Freddie Hubbard was on that CD. We had a string quartet, and a guy named Azar Lawrence, who played with McCoy Tyner for a while. We had another guy that I used to really like. He played oboe and English horn, and I think he played some alto sax. Jeff Clayton, one of the Clayton brothers from the Los Angeles area. And we had, who else did we? We had Steve Kujala on that CD, who was a wonderful flute player. He could bend notes on a flute like no other person I've heard yet. And if you ever find that CD, listen to the piece that we wrote called Nice Reading. It's an atonal piece, but you know, listen to his tone and his sound effects and stuff on that piece.
Do you want to play a little jazz, you know, in that earlier genre right now?
I can.
Yeah.
This piece I'm going to play is a piece that appeared on my first CD, and we re-recorded it and changed the name. First time we recorded it, it was L.A. Samba, and it was probably more like a samba.
Like in Los Angeles.
Yeah. And the next time I recorded it, I did it on the Blues and More CD for Wyndham Hill. And we changed the name to Samba C. It's actually more like a salsa piece. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
On his website, henrybutler.com, in his bio, it talks about the percussiveness of McCoy Tyner and the New Orleans style of Professor Longhair. And in that genre, you know, you're talking about the piano traditions in New Orleans. You are obviously one of the greatest in that. What have you been doing to push the envelope to a higher level or a new level?
Well, first of all, I was one of those guys, you know, who used to follow McCoy around. You know, and it really didn't happen because I was truly stalking him. It happened. You know, it's like it just so happened that when he was in Atlanta, I was in Atlanta. And when he was in Miami, I was in Miami. And of course, I started spending time with him when he used to work at Slugs in New York back in the early 70s. And I realized, and really, I think I gravitated to him because of my New Orleans roots. He was so rhythmical and so percussive that it just, if I was going to start working with, you know, and listening to jazz artists, then he was going to be the guy for me, and he was the guy. During the time that I was following him, I also studied with another guy, Sir Roland Hanna, who was the total opposite of McCoy. He used to tell me, he says, "Man, I can't use McCoy. McCoy beats the piano up," is what he used to say. And he says, and this is almost a direct quote, I love treating the piano like a beautiful woman. Yeah.
I got to tell you, Henry recorded on my piano at my house a couple of years ago for a tribute to James Booker, and I kidded Henry today that after Henry played the piano, I needed $500 to fix it.
Well, you know, that happens like that sometimes. But so I was sort of caught in the middle of these guys. I was hanging out with McCoy and studying with Roland, who probably was one of the most underexposed pianists in this country. Definitely not underrated. But and they both had different musical philosophies, you know, which is, you know, you just learn to deal with it. In any case, I think going back to your question, I think one of the things that I'm doing to bring some of this to a different level is, I mean, I've prepared myself pretty thoroughly. I'm not sure how well that was, but I definitely have prepared myself pretty thoroughly. I mean, I've studied classical music and got my degrees in classical voice. And one of the things that I've found myself doing is using some of those themes that I've learned, or some of those themes that I've learned in classical music, and sort of treating them, well, probably a lot differently than most classical people would. And if not the themes themselves, just the concept. You know, the Baroque period was a good period for, you know, using flavors and concepts, and still is a good period to sort of take from it concepts and the flavors and the schemes, so to speak. And we try to work with people that, students and other people that we work with to do the same thing so that they don't have to sound like just everybody else, you know. We all have our way. Every human being, every individual has his or her own way of putting their stamp on things. They just have to learn how to do it. And one of the ways we suggest is by listening to either classical music or taking simpler songs and just sort of making a game out of it at first, and then it becomes real. You just stretch it out. And, it's one of the things that I did on my Pianola Live CD with a song like "You Are My Sunshine." It's a very simple song, but when you hear it, you think there's some real work in there. There's some real music in there.
John Snyder he can't be here today, and he asked me to ask you about your business and how we're here to monetize an artist. Every artist, if they want to make a living at it, have to make money.
That's right.
And so tell us a little bit about your publishing. You've composed quite a few pieces of music. Agents, and being blind, you have assistants. It's obviously an extra chore for you than somebody else to be traveling so much. He lost his house at Katrina and has been living in Denver. And, you've been on the road a lot lately. How do you go about all that?
Well, it takes a little planning, takes a little coordinating, takes getting other people involved. It takes having a vision for yourself. Let's start with that. Start with realizing a vision for yourself. It's not always easy for young people to do because they're so busy working on the nuts and bolts of learning how to play, trying to assimilate what they're learning, and it takes some people longer than others to gather the information and then sort of start to assimilate it, start to organize it, start to put labels on it, and, that kind of thing, and then maybe get into the theorizing part of it. So while you're doing all of that, it's hard to have that vision. But once you get to a place where you've passed the theory and passed a great deal of the experimentation, then you can sort of see yourself as a professional musician, perhaps. You can start to imagine yourself as a person who has something to offer, a person who has something to give, right? A person who has enough to inspire and inform and encourage people and maybe even uplift people. So I'm crazy enough to think that I have all that. And while I feel that I have that, that's just the seed for everything else. That's the seed for having some kind of a business plan, having some kind of getting other people involved with publicity, getting people, getting record companies involved, getting people who are interested but don't know how to contribute, finding a way for them to lend their energies or their monies or their time, whatever, right? So it used to be, when I first started in this business, when I first started on the recording side of this business, which was in 1985, yes, that's that's before most of you were born, probably. But when I first started in this business, it was still okay for musicians just to be musicians. For musicians to not think as much about the business. They could get a recording contract, and many of them didn't necessarily read the contracts. They just knew that they were going to get a certain amount for an advance, and that, took them through a certain period of time, and then they were out looking for more, right? Or back to the record company looking for more. And record companies had a thing they used to, a pet phrase they used to give to musicians when they'd come back looking for more, and that was, listen, man, we're not a bank, we're not, it's not like we are here to give money away, and at the same time, companies like MCA were involved in what we call, cutouts. Cutouts were LPs or CDs, cassettes, or product that they sold without giving the artist an accounting for them. So, the artists, once they found out about that, they usually had some decisions to make. They either stay with the record company, or they would, like I did actually, move on up the road. I did 2 records for MCA Records. One was entitled Five and Around, and the other one was The Village, and that one featured Ron Carter and Jack DeJohnette and Bob Stewart on tuba, and Alvin Batiste, the late Alvin Batiste.
Who was an influence
Yes,
for you
he
in your
was,
younger days?
yes, especially when I was in college. Well, when I moved to New York, the relationship with MCA was a little strained, and we may get back to that later, but I figured I must have been something special, because the vice president of Jazz A&R called me up, and they wanted to have a meeting with me, and they closed down the MCA building in New York to do this. And when I got up there and got settled in, one of the guys said, the vice president of A&R said, "Hey man, you're a very talented artist, and we really like you a lot. You're really smart." And when they started talking about smart, my being smart, I knew it was time to go, because, and I was actually right on about that, because there is, I'm not sure if it's an intimidation thing, but it's really tough for many record executives to take an artist who is really working on knowing something about the business. It's really, um, it seems not to be easy for them to deal with that, and especially if they get caught doing something that's not favorable to the artist.
We just have a few more minutes, Henry. I'd like to open it up for the students,
Okay.
and then maybe we'll have you play a tune at the end. How's
Okay,
that sound?
that's good.
If anybody has some questions, please come to the microphones for Henry. Anybody at all, please come forward. And yeah, here we go.
I just like to, this is really tall, but anyway. I'd just like to know, what advice would you give to young pianists to build up their chops to do runs like you did?
Okay, that's a very good question. One of the things you want to do is do what I call the grunge work. That's the work that nobody likes to do. And it's the work that seems boring. It's the work that seems, you know, you think you got it after you have played these sequences a few times perfectly. But one of the things we like to see, and one of the things we suggest with students, is stay at training the fingers. Training the fingers are important. And how do you train the fingers? You train the fingers through running through scales, manipulating scales, manipulating arpeggios, creating different exercises where you know you're weak, right? Or have your teacher help you with that. Training the fingers. When I say training the fingers, I mean allowing the mind to connect with the movement of the fingers and to control the fingers. Sometimes the fingers lead us down pretty seriously bad paths. And so we try to stay away from that. We try to, and it takes years. I mean, gosh, Art Tatum used to take a case of beer and he'd practice for like 12 hours a day, 10 to 12 hours a day on technique and how to make this work on that tune and how to make this something else work on another tune. And I mean, and he also thought that when he was listening at some of the piano rolls those were played by one person, which really kind of motivated him to play as much as he played. But, and I'm not suggesting that you spend 10 to 12 hours a day, but if you can find 2 to 3 hours, a day, or 4 hours, I mean, depending on how heavy or light your load is as students. So that's the way that I would recommend to you right now. When you get to a different place, then I might have some other recommendations.
Any other? Yes.
Hi, Henry. My name is Ryan Count, and we worked briefly at a KUVO Christmas event last year with a band called Groove Sect.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was there, I really noticed how enthusiastic fans of Denver was and how the population was really welcoming to the New Orleans community. Is there any reason you think that the New Orleans music is found such a good market in Denver?
Henry's there.
Well, that's one of the reasons. But you have to understand the enthusiasm that New Orleans brings, that New Orleans music brings to the performance site. And especially to a town like Denver, where there's nothing original there in terms of music. And that's not, that's just the way it is.
Thank you.
He mentioned that about food, too.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I'm not, there are good musicians there. But most of the musicians who are there, who are playing well, are from somewhere else. And, you know, you have some guys in there who spent time in New York or from New York or, you know, that kind of thing. But it's one of those towns, and Colorado, you know, is one of those states where they say that they created mountain grass, which is kind of a version of bluegrass, you know, and some of it sounds all right, you know. Some of it sounds okay, but make no mistake, I mean, the fact that a community has good musicians doesn't mean that there's original culture there. New Orleans, New York, San Francisco, parts of Appalachia, Kentucky, Virginia, Carolinas, you know, Nashville, and maybe some other parts of Tennessee. These are all proven locales that have original music and original culture. Austin doesn't have original culture. You know? It has lots of music.
Well, speaking of original, we just have a few more minutes. How about one more tune, maybe an original? Let's hear it for Henry.
Thank you. Actually, I'm not going to do an original, but I'm going to give it an original treatment. How's that?
Yeah.
Is this working?
Yeah.
2, 2, 2. Can you hear that out there?
Yeah.
1, 2. This is an old classic by Chris Kinner. And Chris Kinner wrote a lot of tunes in the early 50s through the early 60s. And some of them did very well for him. This piece is entitled, Something You Got. Something you got makes me work all day. Thank you. Thank you.
Henry Butler.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry.
Pleasure.
All right, man.